Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Harder Soft F1 podcast, otherwise known as the HOS F1 podcast. Adrian, nice to see you again.
Hello.
Welcome back. Just get up the show notes here. We haven't talked about Monza yet. We won't go into it in depth because I already did a podcast on that. But want to get your overall kind of what you think of it, and in the wake of the incidents, I guess you would say, between two Ferrari drivers and the two McLaren drivers, they sort of had opposite reactions. The team did, I guess. So let me hear what you thought about the race, and then I'll talk about the Ferrari and McLaren discussion.
Yes. Well, it was slightly disappointing, of course, with being the Red Bull 1-2. I'm obviously very excited for Max breaking the record. I'm now sort of interested to see how long Red Bull is going to continue their win streak, because it's getting a little bit insane. But the race itself, I thought, was actually quite interesting. I had to go back and actually watch the whole thing later that evening. I was kind of watching it indiscriminately, just at different points since I was out of town. But the two incidents in particular, the Ferrari one kind of just made me laugh, honestly, because the timing was so Ferrari with gosh, I'm struggling with to pronounce his name. Xavi, Charles's engineer. He was literally telling him to keep it clean and to stay safe. And literally the second that radio cut, he swerves off and almost hits the back of Carlos Sainz. So we almost had a Mercedes 2016 Spain incident, which I think would have been almost more exciting than a Ferrari podium, but that's just me. And as far as the Lewis and the Oscar incident, I think people blew that just a little bit out of proportion. It was definitely sort of more leaning towards it being on Lewis, but personally, I would just call it a racing incident. And main thing was just, I was just bummed that it kind of screwed up both their races, more so Oscar, but it screwed up Lewis's race too. But yeah, I'm happy that Ferrari were able to show a little bit of pace, even though it kind of only was leaning towards the long straights. But in practice and qualifying, Sainz was sort of leading a lot of points in the track. But yeah, I actually really enjoyed it. I'm very satisfied and proud of Checo for at least managing to secure P2.
Yeah, he did a pretty good job. In terms of the Lewis Oscar, I would even admit that was Lewis's fault. It wasn't like a big incident or anything. And in the end, the 5-second penalty didn't even really affect Lewis too much. So I'm not too upset about it. He apologized to Oscar. So if Lewis is saying he was in the wrong, then yeah, we'll just take that and move on. Everything's just always so like hot and cold online
Yes.
whenever it's anything to do with Lewis or Max. But yeah, in terms of like Lando and Oscar made contact and kind of
They
have
did.
their issues trying to kind of pass. And then after the race, their team principal said that it was unacceptable and that there's under no circumstances can they be doing that. He wants them to race each other, but they doesn't want them to touch. And that's obvious. But
Yeah.
then Ferrari, I thought if they're Charles and Carlos, especially that one on the last lap, was even closer to just ruining both their races completely and getting no points out of it. But so I was kind of curious to see what their reaction would be afterwards, to see if they were going to be getting in trouble or if they were going to be mad at each other. But Charles was, at least I haven't seen what Carlos said, but Charles was like, he said he loved it. He said it was one of the most fun times he's had. And it would have been boring if he just sat back, but he thought it was a lot of fun, and that's kind of the way that they have been told to race, and that's how they want to race, and like that's just racing. So good for us as fans. He even admitted
Sure.
that I'm sure there was a couple guys in the team that were a little nervous, but
Oh,
as a
yeah.
fan, it's exactly what we want to see. So I was happy to see that, and I don't really blame McLaren for taking their point of view on it either. But yeah, good to see that Charles and Carlos will keep racing, because if two close teammates are racing, it's something to watch. But I guess one guy we won't be able to watch, unfortunately, to make a little segue, is Daniel Ricciardo. There, at first, when we heard he broke his hand, we thought maybe he was going to be back for, maybe he would miss one race, like just the Dutch Grand Prix, and then it was like obviously he was going to miss at least last week's race too. But then now he's going to be out for at least 2 more. Closest he's can be returned is going to be Qatar. So pretty disappointing for Daniel, and obviously those of us still love watching Daniel. But yeah, what do you think when you heard the news that Danny's out at least 2 more races?
Oh man, it's super disappointing, especially since Daniel sort of was generating a lot of hype about a potential return to the Red Bull seat. Even I think we both even said that that wasn't like a guarantee, as much as Horner, or not even Horner, mostly Helmut Marko have been putting a little bit of doubt, and Checo himself, sort of. I guess you'll touch on that later about his future, but uh, it's definitely disappointing because Danny, for the most part, has been out qualifying Yuki Tsunoda. He's been obviously showing his experience in that not so great car, but um, it's very disappointing. But the repercussions of that have been pretty interesting, with Liam Lawson taking over and now having beaten Yuki Tsunoda, which I think is quite interesting. It Does that put a little bit of doubt on Yuki? I think for some people it could, that he's, potentially not, world championship material, or at least a race winner material. For me, it's definitely put a little bit of question into his performance. Looking at the results here. Oh yeah. Of course, Yuki DNF'd and Liam Lawson qualified 11th, which, I mean, 1 point away from getting in the points is really commendable. It's with only 2 DNFs in the entire race. But I'm still really disappointed for Danny because Helmut Marko has pretty much all but said that they're considering a drive for Liam, whether it's on the future Hugo Boss AlphaTauri, or if they can find him a seat elsewhere. But he's done a good job. What do you think about his performance, just having to get to grips with the car so immediately? A not so great car at that.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty impressive. I mean, the combination of him and Danny Rick are really making the other combination of Yuki and Nick DeVries look pretty bad. I mean, yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a good car, but like, bad break for Yuki. His car breaking down on the formation lap, so we didn't even get to. We don't know what he would have done last race, but
Yeah.
For Liam Lawson to finish 11th, as you said, only 2 guys DNF. Pretty impressive. Like, it's a very fast track, tough track. So I know he's probably raced on it before, but yeah, really impressive. He's just been able to jump in really with no practice aside from, like, going into this week. He really had just had the race in Holland. So yeah, really impressed with him. I think you mentioned that, I don't know if how Marco or if him and Horner said it, but the fact that he could get an F1 seat, it makes sense. I mean, I don't want us to fall victim again to what happened with Nick DeVries last year, because I think it happened at Monza as well. So,
For sure.
I mean, I don't want us to get carried away too much, but luckily for Liam Lawson, he's got at least 2 more races to show what he can do. But yeah, I guess the future, I don't know what the future holds in the whole Red Bull team, with the Hugo Boss thing, with AlphaTauri leaving and them just kind of turning into a Red Bull junior team again, plus all the Checo stuff. Like, I don't know. There's lots of rumors and stuff going on in that sense.
There are. The whole Red Bull dynamic is sort of up in the air right now, because 2 weeks ago we were saying, oh, it's going to be Daniel Ricciardo back with Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, potentially Liam Lawson with Yuki Tsunoda in the AlphaTauri. But that also is come into question a lot this past week, with a lot of different news reports and Nico Rosberg making certain comments. He actually made a comment really quickly about Leclerc's response. Did you see that, about Leclerc's response to the battle with Sainz? He basically
No.
said that he thought that Leclerc gave like a political answer, that like that's what we want to hear. Oh, we had a great time. And he's like, I've said plenty of times post race that I had a great time racing, but really I was miserable, because he's like, Leclerc definitely wanted that podium. So he just thinks he's portraying the nice guy a little bit too much, which I thought was quite interesting. I don't know if it's necessarily that far. I think Charles is a good sport and knows there's not really a chance to fight for a championship this year. So he was fighting hard for that podium, though. I'll give him that. But back to what I was originally talking about. Nico Rosberg originally stated that there was going to be a big switch up as far as one of the top teams next year in 2024. But of course, everyone's leaning towards it being Red Bull, and even Nico Rosberg has now teased again that it is Red Bull that he's talking about. But Checo is signed to the end of 2024. So lots of rumors are circulating about who could be replacing him, where could Checo be going, and the number one name that's being thrown around right now, and he himself has even uh, spoken about the possibility, and that's Lando Norris potentially could be Max Verstappen's future teammate, whether it's next year or in 2025. It's becoming more and more likely. I mean, Christian has commented on it. Helmut has commented on it. Lando has commented on it, and Max has commented on it. And even Zach Brown has made a comment on it. Of course, he said that Lando would be staying until the end of 2025, which is the other point about this whole thing, is that Lando is signed with McLaren until the end of 2025. So Red Bull, we know they've pursued Lando multiple times before, but right now with sort of the zeitgeist and the chatter of the F1 uh, groups, I guess they're sort of insinuating, some people are even just flat out saying it's going to happen no matter what, is that Lando's going to go to Red Bull. But I don't think people are really considering how much of a price tag Lando would come with. And I think what McLaren would demand that contract is worth, which I think is very lucrative. You know, Lando's a very desired talent, but I mean, what do you think? Do you think Red Bull are going to buy him out of his contract? Do you think they're going to let Checo race to the end of 2024, maybe slip in a little Danny Rick in 2025 until the end of that contract? Or are you thinking maybe they're wanting to put Lando in a little bit sooner?
I don't know. They've kind of got my mind in a pretzel right now. It seems to change every few days.
Yes.
One thing, I guess there's a couple things I want to point out. One, yes, it's a lot of money, but as we saw with the Danny Rick buyout, like 20, 30, 40 million dollars to an F1 team like Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, it's actually not that much money to them. So like, I guess I would say the money isn't necessarily what would hold it up if every party wanted it to happen.
Yep. Does it fall under the cost cap?
Does not. And yeah, we'll talk about that in a bit too. But the other comment before I get into my actual opinion is I don't really trust anything that comes out of Nico Rosberg's mouth. Like, he likes to stir the pot. He's pretty miserable himself, to use a phrase he used in a quote earlier, comparing himself to Charles. But yeah, I don't know. In terms of actually Lando going to Red Bull, I don't think, like the rumor is picking up some steam. I don't think it's necessarily any sort of slam dunk yet. It really, I think, comes down to what Lando wants. If Lando wants to drive a Red Bull, then I mean, he can easily get out of. This kind of ties into the next talking point, which is that Helmut Marko did actually make the first public comments about Checo not being with Red Bull in 2024. They haven't really towed that line yet. He said something along the lines of that Checo's been very inconsistent, hasn't been living up to standards, but also that it's F1 and there's always a way to get out of things or get different drivers, or I forget his exact quote, but basically, yeah, they can. There's always a way to get out of things if they want to. So that was his first kind of remark about it, and then I believe someone asked Checo about it, and he said something along the lines of, if they don't want him in 2024, then he'll have to find somewhere else. But he wants to keep driving, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if that got taken out of context or whatever. But yeah, it's very interesting that all of this is swirling. It does seem, usually when there's this much smoke, there is at least something brewing behind the scenes. Whether we get anything that comes out of it, I don't know. But yeah, if Lando and Max, I guess, isn't the other thing. Does Max actually want to race against Lando? I'm sure this will be his third in a row. It would probably be nice for him to have a little bit of competition, based on, I guess that's the only card people can play now is like, oh, well, you haven't raced against any competition other than 2021, obviously. So I don't know. It will come down to those two. I don't think Checo or McLaren even are that big of hurdles to get over if Red Bull and Max and Lando want it to happen. But yeah, lots of rumors kind of swirling around it. So we'll see. Personally, I would love to see it. I would love to see Lando racing there, if for nothing else, just to at least have hopefully some competitive driving at the front. And Lando will finally be able to get his first win. Be nice.
Yes, I wonder how quickly that would happen. I'm sure a lot quicker than Checo's first win, if I'm being completely honest. As much as I like Checo, I definitely think he's got a seat somewhere on the F1 grid. Maybe in the McLaren team, maybe a little
We'll
driver
swap.
swap. Yeah, a little swapperoni. Who knows? You're definitely right. McLaren, if Lando wants it to happen, I mean, they don't want a driver to be miserable and not, fit the team dynamic, whether that's Lando Norris, they're not going to want him around for 2 years straight. So I think they'll take the buyout. As much as it is 100% just rumors, I would be extremely excited about that change and would be giddy with excitement for the battles that we'd see. Even though I think Max would still come out on top, it would be way more competitive than we have right now, at least, especially next year, because Lewis has been talking about how good the Mercedes car next year is supposed to be, but we'll have to see about that. But regarding Checo and Helmut Marko, there's been a lot of posts about Helmut Marko today on Formula One Twitter and Reddit about a statement that he made to a German news site. He did the interview in German. I watched it, of course, could not understand it, but found a translation. And he's been sort of spinning this narrative the last couple of weeks that Checo isn't really up to the standards that they want for Max's teammate, uh, harking it to his lack of performance, especially in qualifying. But in this specific interview, he pointed out drivers like Max, of course, and Sebastian Vettel and talked about their determination and their focus and how much they're willing to work and train to, be the best. And he said effectively that Checo is not as motivated and doesn't work as hard, so he doesn't get the amount of performance that those two get. And he said it was due to him being South American that potentially could have uh, a contributing factor to that, essentially, which, yeah, obviously is just complete xenophobic, racist garbage, out of some crazy old guy's mouth. I mean, as I'm wearing Red Bull merch right now, I love Christian, I love Max, I love Checo, but whether I agree if Checo's performance isn't up to snuff or not, or whether I agree with that or not, there's absolutely no way that I would ever agree with the statement like that. I mean, that is just absolutely ridiculous. You know, what you look like does not determine how hard you work or your background or anything like that. That is just some absolutely ridiculous statement. So I just wanted to sort of get that out there. And, I'm sure, that just adds fuel to your fire of hatred for that man, which I completely understand. I mean, it's just completely just got to reiterate just how completely unacceptable that is. I mean, bringing that into a conversation about motorsport. I mean, Formula One has at times, even very recently, been a racist sport, but I mean, comments like that are going to keep knocking it back towards the sort of bad states that it's been in, at least behind the scenes, at least. So, yeah, not a fan of that at all.
No, that was disappointing. I mean, it happens. I mean, it's happening more frequently now, but it happens at least a couple times a year where we have to talk about him
Yeah,
in this kind of way, where it's just surprising that he still has his job. It's kind of a double-edged sword with him because yeah, he never knows when to shut his mouth. So we get things like this, and then we also get the times where he is the first one to leak a rumor that clearly he shouldn't be talking about yet. Like all this
yeah,
Checo stuff, he should not be opening his mouth. And then that stuff kind of makes it happen because he
yeah,
says it, it lends credibility to it, and then the discussion starts. So it kind of makes it actually happen. So as a fan and a podcaster of F1, it's sort of like, yeah, I despise the guy, but also gives us topics quite a bit. Obviously, I
for
don't like
sure.
it when it's this type of topic. Um, but yeah, don't want to give too much more time because he's just a piece of shit and he should probably be put in a home. But this next one is kind of confusing because just to tie it back to the McLaren stuff, Alex Palou
Yes.
is destroying IndyCar, and I believe he's the guy that's like winning in the standings by a bunch. Um, but he's saying that he's left McLaren to join Chip Ganassi's team because there's no chance of an F1 seat, if I'm understanding that correctly, which is a little bit confusing because if Lando does leave for Red Bull, I mean, there's a seat right there, and given how well he's doing, I don't know. He obviously looks like he should be. I just want to make sure that I'm thinking of the right guy.
Yeah,
he's
he's winning. Yeah.
He's in first place by a bunch. Okay, so yeah, he's obviously showing that he's capable of driving an F1.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe he has like a handshake deal somewhere else that if he leaves, but Ganassi's not tied to any F1 teams as far as I know. Although there's some new teams coming in, so yeah, a little bit confusing that seat that could actually come open. It will be interesting what happens with that if the McLaren seat comes open and then he's just left because there's no seat open. So that's kind of all I have on them. Yeah, any thoughts on the IndyCar leading McLaren?
Yeah, I mean, when I read that this morning, that made me laugh really hard just because I understand where he's coming from, but he just sometimes, you're Oscar Piastri and it works out for you, and sometimes you're Alex Palou and you potentially destroy your reputation with a Formula One team potentially before they could be getting rid of their star driver. I don't know. That's crazy to me. But I understand the frustration, being tempted with that Formula One seat and not getting it after so many years is disheartening. I mean, if he cannot get into Formula One, I mean, how do you get into Formula One? I mean, I'm just looking at the IndyCar standings right now. I mean, he's got 5 wins so far this season. The only person that's even close to him is Josef Newgarden with 4, and he's in third. 2 poles, 12 top 5s, 16 top 10s. I mean, he is a legend right now. He's absolutely crushing it, and he just can't get to Formula One, and it's extremely disappointing. I'm very bummed for him because I enjoy watching him drive, and if there's one person from IndyCar or Formula 2 that I would like to see get a journey to F1, it would be him. So I'm bummed that timing may have just really, really screwed him over. But yes, he's going to be moving to Chip Ganassi Racing. But speaking of another team, well, that was just a bad segue. But another team that could be potentially joining Formula One that sort of has their foot in IndyCar is Andretti. They've posted sort of this really cool graphic with Cadillac, who's their title sponsor. They sort of have an agreement that if they're able to enter in F1, that's going to be their sort of supplier for the engines and the development. But it was like an announcement banner. It was this type of thing you'd announce when it's like, hey, we officially have a team, which has been approved by the FIA that they would allow them to enter Formula One, but it needs to be approved by Formula One itself. So that's where all the team principals and guys like Mohammed Ben Sulayem come in. You've got these guys with lots of other guys with their wallets out saying, hey, we don't want this to happen. So it's possible that it could happen. I really, really want it to happen. When we talked a few weeks ago about potential teams that could be joining the Formula One grid, I think we both said that that's by far the most exciting prospect and who we both would go for to join the grid. So do you have any thoughts on them potentially coming to the grid in 2026?
Nothing like new. I mean, I think you touched on pretty much all of it. It's I mean, they got past the first stage, but I think obviously the harder stage is F1, and
Yes.
a couple of the principals, including Toto, have made it pretty clear that they don't want them in.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's not looking good, but just keep on trying, and maybe they'll knock down on that door eventually. But yeah, not too hopeful. I guess we'll have to see how, for example, like Ford's partnership goes with Red Bull, see how the American companies kind of get in, if they can get into F1 and be successful. But yeah, a team, trying to make a segue here, a team that started out very successful this year, but it's not. I just want to kind of get your opinion on this, just a little chat. Like, what do we think is going on at Aston Martin? They have dropped now to fourth place from after having a pretty secure hold on second in the Constructors' Championship. They started. I've got the standings for race by race. Starting the season, 23 points, 15, 27, 22, 15, 18, 14, 20, 21 in Austria. And then since then, as a team, 6 points, 3 points, 12 points, 19 points in Zandvoort, and then just 2 points this last week. Meanwhile, Ferrari and Mercedes have passed them and are getting better, while Aston Martin just seemed to have stalled. I mean, especially Lance had one of his worst weekends of his career this past weekend, getting last place in Q1, I think, not even close to making it to Q2, and then obviously 0 points in the race. So, yeah, what do you think is going on with Aston Martin?
I mean, Fernando has been able to put in some good results, whether it's the back of the grid in P9, or not the back of the grid, back of the points in P9, or, if he's on the podium, he's managed to secure points. He's one of the 3 drivers who's secured points in every single race this season. So I think Aston Martin is still in a pretty decent place. I mean, they have definitely not, the first or second fastest car, but they should be fighting a lot more than they are. But I think Fernando is, driving that thing on the limit pretty regularly. I think he's doing a very good job. I really just think it's Lance. I mean, there's not really much other explanation that I can think of. He's consistently just terrible. He occasionally will, get some points, put up some numbers, but when you just compare him to his teammate, he has had some very formidable opponents as teammates, I guess, Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso. Even back in Williams, racing with Robert Kubica, I think Sergio Perez for a brief time, unless I'm wrong about that. I'm getting my timelines crossed, but he has just not put any sort of noteworthy performance in. And I just think Aston Martin's really wasting their resources, continuing to let him drive that car. Obviously, Lawrence Stroll is the primary investor. Yeah, primary investor with Aston Martin F1. So don't think Lance's future is in jeopardy by any means, but it should be if Aston Martin does want to be that championship contending team and actually fight for wins and in the top 3.
Seb.
I mean, yeah, exactly. Bring back Seb or just replace Lance. I mean, that's what it's going to take.
Seb and Fernando on the same team. Oof.
That would.
Well, Lance can go play tennis, and
yes,
Seb can come back, and that would just be unreal. Or Theo Pourchaire, he also deserves a F1 seat. We're mentioning guys that deserve a seat.
Yes,
I think Theo Pourchaire has won like everything, F3, F2, some other series. So yeah, there's a couple of guys knocking on the door. But,
absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you there. You can finish
your
point.
By all means, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, he deserves a seat much more than Lance Stroll. So I just think he's sort of what's holding back the team. But the team principal, Mike Crack, has continued to stand behind Lance Stroll and just even today put out a statement that Lance has done a great job against his world champion teammates. So, I mean, I guess they're very happy with him. I don't know how they could be. I guess it's because it has the same name as the Czechs, which makes sense. But some other news regarding Formula One is that there is rumors of a potential new exciting track being built, and it would be another city track, which Formula fans love. They just love when a new city track gets added, and it is the Athens GP. And I'm not talking about the Bulldogs, Athens, Georgia. I'm talking about Athens, Greece. There's rumors that there are discussions going on to potentially hold a Grand Prix in Athens, which, of course, is just a rumor. It's just, sort of an exciting prospect. Maybe they just put it out there and leaked it just to potentially see what the fans' reaction is. I don't think there's anything actually substantial as far as evidence goes, but I think it could be exciting. I'm not really sure exactly how I feel about another like street circuit. Athens, I think, would be just a really, really beautiful place to hold a race, obviously, but I would kind of rather see some like proper racetracks get added. I mean, in 20 years, we're going to have only like capitals of countries and cities be our GPs. I mean, we need more like Hockenheim and Thailand, bring back some proper tracks. But what do you think about Athens GP potentially being added way down the line?
Yeah, I mean, cool idea. Would be cool. As someone that hopes to attend pretty much every F1 place on the calendar at some point in my life, it would be cool to go there. But there's a long list ahead of them already. As you mentioned, like Hockenheim should be there. There's South Africa wants to get in,
Yep.
Hanwha, Vietnam, they want to get back in. And China will be China will probably be back in eventually. So
I think next year.
yeah, so I don't know. I mean, there's only so many. They're pretty much at the limit of how many races they can do, and there's not that many tracks that are going to come off. I mean, the ones that they always talk about would be like Spa and stuff. I don't want to lose Spa, so I don't know. I don't really have too much more to add on that. I'm just thinking of flights, international flights. Someone that lives close to Atlanta. Did you happen to board a plane to Barcelona recently, or know anyone that did?
I have not, no.
Huh.
But I think I know what you're talking about.
A Delta Airbus A350 had to return to Atlanta following an unfortunate incident involving a passenger with severe diarrhea. Yeah.
Oh, I saw that video on Barstool.
Oh yeah, it's just poop, shit everywhere.
Oh my,
they call it a
dude,
biohazard or something. I had to turn around.
An actual nightmare. My
Literally.
actual nightmare.
Poor guy. Assume it's a guy. That's literally worst case scenario. But anyways, back to F1. Just talking about Greece.
Yes.
International flights kind of got me on that. Some good news for depending on which side you look on it. I was kind of hoping for a little bit of drama, but all teams have come in under the cost cap for 2022. Interesting that they released that so much earlier this year. I think last year it came out like after the season. I don't know. I remember it taking a lot longer, and then they had to do like the audit of Red Bull and all that. But I guess they said they kind of upped the process of how many people were monitoring everything for the cost cap. So yeah, I guess it's good. No gardening fees or catering fees or whatever pushed Red Bull over. That's for 2022. We'll see what happens when the 2023 one comes out. I originally thought there's no way Aston Martin wouldn't have gone over, but it seems like they put all their development into the off season and have kind of stalled. So maybe they just haven't been spending as much money on development as the other teams. That could be a reason why they don't want to go over the cost cap. So yeah, I mean, do you have any thoughts on the cost cap? Were you hoping? I would have put a big smile on my face if Red Bull would have gone over the cost cap again. But that being said, then it would have just been months of negative talk and discussion. So probably good for the sport that no one went over it.
For sure. I'm relieved. That's it. I'm just relieved that Red Bull aren't back, potentially cheating, potentially paying too much money for catering, whatever you call it. Just happy that everything's straightforward. Hopefully that's the case for this year too. I definitely think Red Bull have got it under control, though. I mean, they've just managed to sort of get out ahead and stay ahead. But a team that has really managed to climb up the order, especially with Alex Albon, is Williams. They've been doing a really great job lately. It seems like they've got Alex's strategy down. They pit him early for the undercut, and then they just leave him out there on hard tires, and he brings it home, and he does an amazing job. But they're going to be running their Gulf livery for the next 3 races, so that'll be Singapore, Japan, and Qatar. If you say it like Crofty, Qatar, then we'll be seeing a very cool livery on the Williams car for the next 3 races. McLaren used to have partnership with Gulf, but now Williams is going to be running that livery. So very excited. They've posted pictures of that. I will either put a link to that in the description or I'll put a picture up on screen right now. So one of those. But while we are looking at that beautiful new Gulf livery, starting at the Singapore GP, there's going to be a little interesting fact running through my head, and that's that starting from this weekend, it will have been 308 real life days since Max Verstappen, or not Max Verstappen, sorry, since Red Bull have not won an F1 race in an F1 weekend. And when you put it in those terms, I mean, that just is so crazy. Of course, that was George Russell, if I'm not mistaken, was our last non-Red Bull race winner in Brazil. But it's, I mean, it's just been a very long stretch of Red Bulls. I don't really have much more to comment on that. Of course, Singapore is going to be September 17th. So a week from this upcoming weekend, or a week from now, if you are watching this podcast. So very excited to see that Williams Gulf livery, but I'm excited for that long streak to come to an end. I want to see a non-Red Bull winner. I mean, it's got to happen this. It's got to happen at least once this season, or else I'm going to be so sad.
Says the Red Bull fan.
Yes, as the Red Bull fan.
I don't even want to discuss that length. So I'm just going to go back to discuss the Williams Gulf livery and Alex Albon to kind of just finish off that point. Yeah, he's become like the new Minister of Defense. He's great at holding guys off as they come behind him. They're starting able to pass. So that's interesting. The Williams Gulf livery, they had a couple options. The fans voted on it. I really like the one they picked. The only point I would have against it, I guess, is it does kind of look like a McLaren.
It does a little bit, yeah.
When I see it on track, it might look like a McLaren. I'm not sure, but it looks cool. I love the Gulf blue and orange. So yeah, very interested to see that. I'm going to skip right back over the Red Bull streak because I don't want to discuss that, but I will talk about Max's streak because there's been a couple interesting tidbits that have come out from Mercedes. Let's just call it as it is. A couple of comments have come out of the Mercedes paddock, and we can finish on this. I'll say Lewis's first because I don't really have much add on that, and then I'll go into Toto's. So Lewis kind of was asked about his record, like, because the most races in a row Lewis ever won was 5. Max has obviously done double that now as a record for 10. And when asked about that, he just said that he's had better teammates when he was in his dominant years. That's why he didn't. I don't really love Lewis saying this. I agree that it's true, especially this year, and I'm not going to throw any of Max's previous teammates under the bus because I do like them. And I'm not even sure that's what Lewis was referring to. I think he means when he was in his dominant years, Bottas was better than Perez is this year, I think is what the gist of what he's getting down to, or even Nico Rosberg, which I would agree with. I think it was kind of unnecessary, but he was directly asked and he's kind of just in defense mode, I guess. So not my favorite comment from Lewis, but at the end of the day, not unexpected. The Toto one threw me off. I actually had to go watch the clip because I couldn't really believe what I had heard or read. And to paraphrase, saying that Max's record of 10 in a row is basically just a record for Wikipedia. It's something that people read about, but not something that anyone really cares about. He doesn't really look at it with any sort of, I don't think he used the word respect, but that was essentially what he was referring to, is that he doesn't respect the record. And kind of went on that. I think pretty tone deaf and petty, kind of immature of Toto, not kind of what I've come to expect of Toto. I mean, there's no denying that, yes, there's not denying two things that are both facts. Max has been, Red Bull has the fastest car, yes, but Max has also been incredible this year. He's dominated his teammate. He hasn't had any mistakes. All it takes is one mistake and your race is over. He hasn't done that, and he's got pole almost every race. 10 in a row is very impressive. There's no way around that. It's like, I've used an analogy before probably, but as a Buffalo Bills NFL fan, for years I hated Tom Brady because he beat my team every year. But then eventually you just get to a point where you're like, you know what, I have to respect him. I don't like him, but I have to respect him. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where it's at right now with Max. So yeah, that's pretty disappointed, quite frankly, because I did watch a clip and it actually made it worse because Toto, he meant what he said. And not that it's anywhere near anything Helmut Marko would say, but just disappointed in Toto to hear that from him.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. As far as Lewis's comment, first I'll say just to play devil's advocate, these reporters, they phrase questions in a way to get these sort of responses. So I'm not going to fault Lewis specifically too hard. You know, they did ask him to compare, himself to Max and the record. And he's right. I mean, Max is. I think the reason why, and it's why it's so crazy to me that Toto's dismissing it, is that yeah, what if Max was being challenged by someone like Lando? Maybe this record wouldn't have happened. Maybe he would have won 6 and then lost 1 and then 3. Who knows? We don't know. But I think Lewis is just defending his own record, which was potentially being called to question. So I'm not too upset about that. The total comments, yeah, that definitely caught me by surprise. I just don't see how you can't just I mean, this is like record-breaking stuff that, I mean, he didn't even really mention Sebastian Vettel in the quote, but back then that was like an unbelievable record. So for that to be broken again, especially by the same team, I mean, I do understand though. I mean, that is like literally the Antichrist to him. I mean, he probably goes to bed at night just seething, knowing that, this is happening. So I understand, these guys, these team principals, they all make comments. That's sort of the name of the game, especially with Drive to Survive. That's sort of turning it up a notch. I mean, that he may have even said that just to get a clip in Drive to Survive and just to stir up some drama. You never know. But yeah, I mean, I definitely disagree. I think that's an awesome record. I mean, it's probably tough, just watching your biggest rivals continue to win. And I do feel like Mercedes is not, as far as Lewis and George go. I think they've both done a really, really great job, really great, consistent job driving for the team. But the car has just not really been. It's been pretty consistently the third or second, or even very rarely fourth fastest. And I think it's just getting to him. I mean, it's frustrating. So, and Christian has made some pretty negative comments about Lewis and Mercedes in the past. So I feel like he's just taking any opportunity he can just to try to, cut Red Bull. So, I'm not too mad about it. But personally, I obviously think the record is an incredible feat. But I'm enjoying the drama. That's for sure. Do you have anything else to add on to that?
No, I mean, it'll be interesting next year to see if Mercedes does actually come back, but see those two going at it again, whether it's Toto and Christian or Lewis and Max. Nothing better than that.
Yes.
But yeah, that's pretty much all I got for this week.
I'm very excited. The prospect of, I don't think we'll see Lando in the Red Bull next year, but there's some very exciting team dynamics, especially with the teams up top. But yes, I think that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. This is episode 69. So I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Yes. Make sure you, Mike Crack, he's going to love this episode, but make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our TikTok page at HarderSoft F1. We've been posting there a lot more, so we're trying to get our followers up. So if you follow us over there and subscribe to our YouTube, we'd absolutely love that. Come back next week. We're going to talk about some more F1 news and give our predictions for the following week's Singapore GP. So come back next week, and thank you again.